Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of Sales TV Live. Today, we're turning technical presentations into stories that sell. I'm joined by David Duffett, Chief Enthusiasm Officer at Let the Geek Speak. From crafting impactful presentations to delivering global keynote speeches, David draws on years of experience to help technical professionals shine in front of any audience. David, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me along, Rob. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great having you for sure. David, let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, okay, Rob. Well, it's great to be here. But it's a good evening for me here. It's 5 p.m. in the UK, but it's lovely to be sharing with you here. I started off just loving communications as far back as I can remember. When I was a young lad, CB was very popular in the US of A, and it was kind of finding its way into the UK a little bit, although it was illegal at the time. The government hadn't authorized it. And so I got involved in that, and also did a little bit of pirate radio as well, which
Oh,
was fun. And it was only later on when I spoke to a kind of an industry leader in the world of personal development, a guy called Daniel Priestley, that he said to me, "I'll tell you what," he said, "your tree is communications, and these things that you're telling me about, like CB radio, like helping people to speak better in public, like telephone systems, which is another thing that I got involved in." He said those are all apples on the tree. So I'm a kind of a communications person, and I found my way into the Civil Aviation Authority. That's like the FAA over there in the USA. And I was teaching people how to repair equipment at airports and air traffic control centres, which was very exciting. But I never quite felt as technical as some of the other people doing it. And years later, now that I'm a little bit more comfortable in my own skin, I realized that my pendulum didn't swing all the way up there as technical as some of the most technical people, because actually I'm a bit of a people person as well. I like communicating with people. And so where I've ended up is helping technical people to be better communicators.
oh, that's awesome. Thank you for that. So, David, I want to jump right into it. While I know I'm asking you to generalize, in your expert opinion, what are the biggest communications challenges for sales engineers?
Well, here's the problem, that often engineering type folk don't really cultivate a level of self-awareness to understand the way that they do things very consciously, and therefore the best way to do things for other people and the difference between those two. Whenever you're approaching an audience of any kind at all, you really need to walk in the audience's shoes. In fact, you might remember Jack Handy from Saturday Night Live, Rob. He said, great advice actually, he said, if you're going to criticize somebody, walk a mile in their shoes first, because then when you do criticize them, you'll be a mile away and have their shoes. Anyway, yeah, it's really thinking about your audience. And so as a sales engineer, when you come out, you might think to yourself, in fact, you might not even get to the thought process that I learn best by doing. So I'm going to be very practical with my audience. But if you do have a level of self-awareness and a level of consciousness about the audience, you'll think, how would this audience like to receive my information best? How are they going to take it in? How are they going to digest it? And how are they going to implement it? Now, I don't know whether this has ever happened to you, Rob, but sometimes we try and watch a video on YouTube or Vimeo or Rumble or wherever it is, and you see that little circle going around saying buffering, don't you? Has that ever happened?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And it's a poor connection. And so the point I want to make here is that sales engineers and many other types of engineers as well sometimes get out in front of an audience without ever making the right connection, having the right amount of bandwidth with their audience. And that bandwidth is rapport. And within that connectivity is how we understand the audience needs to receive our information. So that's where I would start.
So, how can technical professionals become more engaging presenters? How can they work on that connection piece?
Well, a great thing to do is for them to actually be in touch with their target audience before they ever meet them. To say, you know, I'm coming round next Thursday or whatever to demonstrate this software or to talk about this. And I was thinking of covering X, Y, and Z. What do you think? And let the audience respond back ahead of time. And even better to say, listen, last time you saw a great presentation or you were really wowed by a demo. What made it so special? And so we begin to get an idea of the kind of thing that that audience would like. I mean, sometimes I use the example of one of those high-tech coffee machines. Have you ever seen them with the beans on the top and the LCD screen and all the gubbins? And I say, you know, if you were given a brand new coffee machine to a bunch of engineers, this usually is, if you're given a brand new coffee machine, how would you get to grips with it? Are you going to pull it right out the box and start fiddling about with it and playing with it? B, carefully find the manual and then sit down in your most comfortable chair and read it cover to cover? Or C, maybe lean back and just reflect on previous coffee machines you've had and your relationship with them, and what you want to get from this new relationship with the coffee machine. And the point there is to have people just consider the way that they learn best, and then to think about the audience and the way that they're going to learn best, and to make sure they do it in the way that the audience would like. So whether they're action oriented, input oriented, they like to receive some information first, or that last one, which is the reflective mode, that's usually, don't want to make too many sweeping generalizations, but that's usually HR professionals. We don't tend to see so many of them. And if they want to involve a flip chart in that process, then they're definitely HR professionals.
So in my experience, those of a more technical background often believe there is one most bestest way to do everything. And what you're saying is they should be presenting in the way that the audience receives it best. But what if that's different from what they believe is right?
Yeah, you're bang on the money, Rob, with that observation. Yeah, in the technical world, it's often our technical skills and experience that are the currency. You hear things like, Rob really knows his stuff, or Alex, he's really switched on about that particular topic. But my key phrase here is that knowing your stuff is not enough. It's your ability to convey the relevant part of your stuff, not everything you know, just the relevant part that your audience needs, in a way that's going to be easy for them to receive, using that channel of rapport that you need to open with them, in order to get that information across. And so really you have to kind of, as an engineer, learn that there are more ways than one to do things. And that's part of the process that I go through with people.
So in sales speak, how can engineers transition from explaining features and even benefits to demonstrating value?
Great question, Rob. Very well asked, if I may say so. Yeah, it's all about the engineer coming out of that knowing your stuff part and just wanting to dump everything you know, and going into consultative mode and finding out what's most important to the client or the audience, what they're wrestling with. And that might well be outside of the small focus of a presentation. There might be some much bigger business objectives, what I might call the macro level objectives that people are trying to achieve. And so I encourage anybody who's making a presentation, whether they're an engineer or not, to actually delve into that wider context. And in doing so, we find out what really is important to the audience, to the customers, and we want to make them feel heard and understood before we deliver any information that we might want to get across to them in order to help them solve their problems.
So as a sales engineer, how do you balance technical accuracy and sufficient detail with audience engagement?
Yeah, and another great question. And my kind of stock answer, although there's never really a stock answer because I like to find out what people need, but is to come up one level from wherever you are. So if for instance, if you were talking about software and you were very tempted to show people lines of code, what we'd do is actually come up a level to block diagram. If you had got some hardware and you were going to show people a circuit diagram, again, you might come up to some kind of flowchart or schematic or something like that, because we want to take as many people in the presentation as possible with us. We need to have consulted with them beforehand, but we can generally say that the higher level we go, the more people we can take along with us. And of course, there will be people in the audience that might want to ask those detailed questions, but the answers to those detailed questions are probably not of interest to everybody in the audience. And so we need to be very cognizant of that.
So along those lines, what are the best ways to handle technical questions during the sales pitch?
Well, a great thing is to actually ask the questions behind the questions. So if somebody says, does your widget respond to 433 hertz? So that's an interesting question. Why is that relevant to you? Or Bill's asked about this 433 hertz. Is that important to everybody else, to actually gain an understanding of how relevant it is and what the question is behind that? And I remember a particular presentation many years ago in Germany. It was a sales presentation. It was an overview. One of the audience members asked a question about, can this product that you're telling us about do X? Truth of the matter is, it couldn't. And one of my very wise colleagues jumped in and said, that's an interesting question. Well, is that an important feature to you? And the guy said, no, I just wondered, really. And we carried on. We never answered the question about whether it did X or not, because it turned out it wasn't really an important question.
Is that difficult for a technical presenter to not answer a question?
Yeah, you've hit on a very important kind of mindset thing there, because one of the things that we have to do as solutions engineers, as sales engineers, is move from that mindset about we've got all this technical knowledge and we're going to spill it, to actually really working with what the customer really needs. And we need to ask some questions to find that. And so really establishing relevance is probably much more important than spilling technical knowledge.
As a technical sales engineer is working with a less technical sales executive, what are some things that first the sales engineer should understand and talk about with the account executive beforehand? And then I want to ask the converse of that after. So let's start with, what should the sales engineer be asking of the account executive before going into that client meeting?
Yeah, that's another really important area. You see, generally speaking, I know we're talking about sweeping generalizations here, but the account executive, the salesperson, is perhaps going to be much more gregarious and out there. They're perhaps going to be a little bit more at the fly by the seat of your pants end of the market. And also, of course, when things go wrong, they're going to be more possibly at the pointing fingers end of the market. Whereas your sales engineer, if they've come from this engineering background, they're going to be perhaps a little bit more cautious. They're going to want to get into the details, and they're perhaps going to take things on the chin and absorb criticism or finger pointing when it comes along. And so what I encourage sales engineers to do is to actually have a little bit of discovery with the account executive they're going to be working with, to find out what makes them tick and what's important to them, because I see them, the account executive, as actually the sales engineer's first level customer. And so to get a little bit deep with them and find out the most important things to them, and then dive a little bit deeper into what they found out about the prospect that you're going to be talking to, and perhaps get in early enough to kind of drive that conversation, or maybe even be involved. And so you are working together with the account executive in finding out what the end customer or potential customer needs.
And conversely, what can the account executive ask of the sales engineer in advance and do to help prepare both for that client communication?
Yeah, one of the things that an account executive can do very gently, especially if they've done their due diligence with the potential client already, is to explain the wider context to the sales engineer, and to gently get that message across to say, look, I know you know this software or this product inside out. As it happens, what we're trying to solve for this end customer is this particular problem. And so if we can keep the conversation within solving their problem and understanding that need more deeply, that's going to be much more effective than just zooming right in and giving information that might not be relevant. And of course, one of the famous things that happens in this scenario, Rob, is often the sales engineer is not briefed properly, or perhaps doesn't feel briefed properly. And so they come to a scenario where the account executive has said, "Oh, can you jump on a call tomorrow morning at 8:30?" Without any real briefing. And the sales engineer says, "Well, what we're going to talk about? Oh, don't worry, just do the same thing you did last time," kind of deal. And so one of the things we need to do is to educate account managers to actually give more context and more clarity. And so this really depends on whether the scenario is a Batman and Robin, so it's a team of two that are always working together, or whether there's a bunch of salespeople and a bunch of sales engineers, and they're kind of picking from a pool of resources. But I encourage sales engineers, Rob, to be proactive and to kind of grow out their role in talking to the people and actually getting communication channels, those rapport channels that we were talking about earlier, with the account executives they'll be working with to make everything more smooth.
Do you have a framework or some guidelines that you provide to technical presenters?
Yes, I do. They're called 7 power presenting protocols, and they handily all begin with a P. And the very first one of them, Rob, is P for purpose, which is, as I was saying earlier, looking at the purpose of the presentation or the demo, not just inside what we're going to do in the 15 or 20 minutes, but the wider business context. And it's agreeing it, not only with the audience that you're going to see, but with the sponsor, the person that asked you to do that presentation in the first place. Maybe it was your boss, maybe it's a conference organizer, maybe it's somebody from a customer company, but having all of these tied in to start with before you ever meet the people that you're going to present to, if possible. I realize that's not always possible, but it's a good gold standard to aim for.
And what are the key steps to preparing a technical presentation that connects and sells?
Great. Okay, so let's imagine that we've agreed that purpose ahead of time with the audience and the sponsor, and we've got not only the presentation but the wider level objectives. Then the next P is plan. That's planning the structure of the presentation or demo so that it really maximally takes advantage of people's attention span, the way that people land in people's memories, so that we can architect a presentation that really makes use of all the prime time there is in any session. Then the next one is preferences. There's another P, and that's when we are looking at what kind of audience we're working with. Are they more input driven, reflection driven, or action driven? And how can we help them receive the information? Then the next P, Rob, is practice. Yeah. Have you noticed that software engineers will put their software out for beta or beta trialing? Hardware engineers will have prototypes, and you hear about fast time to prototypes. And yet somehow these same people very often don't practice their presentations. And my key thought here is, if a presentation is worth doing, and if it's not, why you're doing it in the first place, but if it's worth doing badly until you can do it well. So practice is very important. So we've already done 4 of the 7 P's there, Rob.
Well, bring us home.
Okay, let's do the last 3. The next one is participation. Nobody likes having things done to them, but everybody likes having things done with them or for them. And so all the best presentations that you've ever been part of, Rob, involved you. And there's a very simple equation to remember, that that involvement equals commitment. So the more you can involve people in a presentation, the more committed they will be to the outcomes. And so one of the things we'll do when we're prepping for any kind of presentation or demo is actually step back and think, how can we involve people in this? Is it by a show of hands? Is it by asking questions? Is it by having people who are in the audience participate by sharing their experience? So, people often have experience in various areas, and so why wouldn't we want to harness that and understand from their point of view what their views are? So that's participation. Now, those first 5, so we go purpose, plan, preferences, practice, participation. All 5 of those happen before you ever get out in front of people and get on stage, as it were, or the front of the room. And there's a very good reason for that. And it's this: when you've talked to technical people, Rob, and they say, oh, I don't like speaking in public, when you kind of peel back a few layers there, it's often not that they're frightened of speaking in public, but they're scared of being ill prepared in front of a bunch of people. And so those first 5 protocols are everything you need to get properly prepared and to get the clarity you need. And so when you come to the next P, the 6th P, which is performance, the actual getting out there, you've got everything you need. You've got confidence from the clarity of having a structure, of knowing what you're going to be talking about, and of course, have agreed it with the people before you get there as well. So the 6th P is performance, and then the 7th P is post-event. I'm sure you've heard on many occasions, or even said it yourself, that the fortune is in the follow-up. And so why wouldn't we apply this to presentations? Why wouldn't we have a process that's going to be agreed and useful to everybody concerned, not just you, the presenter, or the demo person, or the sales engineer, but to your sponsor, to your audience, and to everybody concerned? So there you go. You managed to wangle the 7 Ps out of me, Rob, in a fairly short order there.
That's fantastic. And what do you call those 7 Ps again? What is?
I call them my 7 power presenting protocols. But
power presenting protocols.
Yeah, I would just say this last year I was, might even been the year before actually now. Time flies. I was out in New York with Bloomberg talking about these 7 power presenting protocols. And somebody came up to me afterwards and said, actually, they're not just 7 power presenting protocols, but they're 7 principles of communication. You could apply them to anything. You could apply them to running a team meeting. You could apply them to giving feedback to one of your team in a kind of one-on-one scenario. And when I stood back and thought about it, I thought, yeah, that person was right. And so although I apply them principally for presentations, they work for communications in general too.
It's interesting that you got that feedback, because that's exactly what I was going to follow up with. And it's not just a technical presentation that can benefit from that. That is general communication principles at work there. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And
so go ahead.
Just to carry on, what that helped me see was, and you know, it's a conclusion I'd been coming to for a number of years, is I love to help technical people with their presentations. But actually, it turns out that that's just a symptom of a deeper thing, which is communications in general. And so helping technical people with communications in general helps them. That's a more foundational thing, but it helps them with their presentations too. And of course, it helps them with their communication with their colleagues, their co-workers, their clients, and everybody at work.
That's fantastic. So, David, if you were to summarize one thing you would want our audience to take away from today, what would that one thing be?
I think the one thing would be to always be thinking about the other person or the other people that you're talking to, and be analysing what's in it for them, what's important to them, and how are they going to receive my message most easily. When I open up that communications channel, what is it I can do to really serve them best?
That's fantastic. David, this has been great. How can people learn more, and where can they get in touch with you?
Well, I often hang around in LinkedIn land. So if you go to LinkedIn/in/David Duffett, all one long word, DUFFETT, you'll find me there, quite active there. And the website is called geekspeakhq.com. And if you go there, there's different things, different resources for people, and a little bit of information about the speaking that I do at things like sales kickoffs and community events, and the masterclasses I run as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And we now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get show highlights, beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes. You can scan the QR code on screen or visit us at SalesTV.live and click on newsletter. This has been another edition of Sales TV Live. On behalf of our team back at home, and on behalf of our guest David, We want to thank everyone for being an active part of today's conversation, and we'll see you next time.